This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. As the nation observes Memorial Day, military historian Andrew Bacevich says those who make a public show of saluting the military would do better by demanding accountability from the country's foreign policymakers. Brown University economist Mark Blyth, a leading authority on the financial meltdown, reminds us that banks are supposed to manage risk, not manage casinos. And Bill Press interviews House Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer about the stupidity of the Sequester. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. Follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Andrew Bacevich is a conservative, a retired Army colonel, and a military historian. He says we could best honor our veterans on Memorial Day by holding civilian foreign policymakers more accountable. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Andrew Bacevich is professor of international relations and history at Boston University. He's a graduate of West Point and a Vietnam veteran. In his provocative book, The New American Militarism, How Americans Are Seduced by War, has been reissued in paperback with a new afterword assessing President Obama's role in promoting militarism. Andrew Bacevich, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's good to be with you.
Your book is very critical of both the Bush and Obama administration's foreign and military policies. Since Obama campaigned against the Iraq War, why do you lump him in with President Bush?
Well, I think I don't mean to imply that everything that President Obama has done is identical to everything that President Bush has done. That would be unfair, and that would not be true. But it seems to me that the continuities between the two are striking, and in many respects are more important than the differences between the two. Yes, indeed, Obama drew down and ended the direct U.S. military involvement in Iraq, and Obama expanded and prolonged the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan. Moreover, Obama has expanded the range of ongoing U.S. military operations so that we find ourselves directly or indirectly with covert forces or overt forces engaging Islamist radicals in a wide variety of other countries. So the bottom line would be that if indeed the Bush policies can be fairly characterized as militaristic, the same label applies to Obama.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think Democratic elected officials seem to embrace militarism and foreign interventions as much as, if not more than, Republicans?
Well, I think they are, both parties are fascinated by, infatuated with, the notion that we can use military power to reshape the world in ways that suit our interests. I mean, the difference is that Republicans say that they are doing this on behalf of freedom. The Democrats tend to say that they are doing these things on behalf of human rights. Regardless of the superficial rationale, there is a neo-imperial aspect to the way both parties, or officials from both parties, justify and employ American military power.
We're speaking with Andrew Bacevich, professor of international relations and history at Boston University. What are your thoughts about the commercialization of the military? The use of wounded warriors as a marketing device for consumer products as well as for professional sports?
Well, I find it very off-putting. I think it's kind of a cheap way for profit-making entities to identify themselves with the United States military and to use that identification to sell beer or market some other product to benefit the corporate bottom line. I think that if Americans are genuinely concerned, if they're genuinely interested in supporting the troops, then they should pay more attention to what the troops are sent to do and where the troops are sent to do it. If we love our soldiers, as we claim to, then we should wish to preserve them from harm, and allowing them to engage in basically open-ended wars in places like Iraq and Afghanistan doesn't do that.
I'm sure a lot of the intention from a lot of the people that are out there and playing the games, or the folks that are wearing the camouflage uniforms and things like that, are feel that they're honoring their military. Would you think it actually to be the opposite?
Yeah, I do. I think that they become complicit in the abuse of the United States military by officials in Washington. We would do much better by our soldiers if we demanded greater accountability on the part of the officials who establish and implement our national security policies.
I'm going to sort of change gears here a little bit. Do we need to return to the draft? And if so, how would that improve American foreign and military policies, or would it?
Well, what we need to do is to find a way to close the gap between U.S. troops and American society, a gap that developed in the wake of the Vietnam War with the creation of the so-called all-volunteer force. I don't think that the draft is a way to do that, frankly, because I think the draft is implausible. The 18-year-olds of the country won't support it. The parents of the 18-year-olds will oppose it, so it ain't going to happen. But another way to skin that cat might be to promote the idea of national service. That is to say that all 18-year-olds, all able-bodied 18-year-olds would be obliged to spend some period of time in service to the community and service to the nation, with military service being one option, one choice in a much broader menu of ways to do that. So that might be at least something that I think we should be discussing as a people. And I would note in passing that the idea of national service kind of bubbles up to the top of American politics every 5 or 10 years, and it gets examined and it immediately disappears. We need to have a more serious discussion about the feasibility and the desirability of a program of national service.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that soldiers are better citizens than the rest of those that aren't?
No, I don't. I mean, soldiers in the ranks come from the ranks of the people. They are neither better nor are they inferior to the rest of citizens. And I think it's a mistake to pretend to place soldiers on some kind of a pedestal and to imagine that somehow the military is this reservoir of virtue that oversells soldiers and undersells the rest of American society.
Which takes us back to the commercialization of the military that we continue to see and gets pushed on everybody.
Yes.
We're speaking with Andrew Bacevich, professor of international relations and history at Boston University, also the author of The New American Militarism, How Americans Are Seduced by War. And final question for you. What is your view about the use of drones on the battlefield, elsewhere, for the purpose of, well, killing civilians, American citizens? I mean, how far do we go with the use of drones?
Well, I think unquestionably it's wrong for authorities in Washington to decide that some American citizen in some faraway country represents a threat to national security, and thereby allowing the president to order that person's execution absent any due process.
Okay.
In fact, President Obama has done that and gotten away with it, I think is absolutely appalling. Now, drones are just like any other technology. They to the extent that they enhance the military effectiveness, and they have a place on the battlefield. But drones should not take the place or provide an excuse to avoid any serious thinking about strategy. I mean, the purpose of war, if it has any purpose whatsoever, is to advance your political objectives, to achieve political objectives. And I'm afraid that what we've got under President Obama with this promiscuous use of drones is that it's become an excuse not to think strategically. There's no question that we can kill people, but killing them to what end? That's the question, it seems to me, that we've been dodging.
Okay. Andrew Bacevich, professor of international relations and history at Boston University, also the author of The New American Militarism, How Americans Are Seduced by War. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Hopefully we get to talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. A leading world economist tells us Democrats can take a lesson from the Tea Party and not bail out banks. He argues that banks are supposed to manage risk, not become casinos. We'll get to that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Sometimes the collusion between big corporations and our government is so ridiculous, so rancid, that it makes you laugh, cry, and gag all at once. And then you pass out from the sheer stink of it. That's how I felt when I saw the compromise that Senators Chuck Schumer and Orrin Hatch reached on the big immigration overhaul that recently oozed out of the Judiciary Committee. Some people oppose this reform bill because they claim it provides amnesty for foreign workers who entered our country illegally. But with the foul hash cooked up by Schumer and Hatch, what it really provides is amnesty for America's avaricious, wage-busting high-tech tycoons. Such plutocratic princes of Silicon Valley as Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook and Larry Ellison of Oracle have glommed onto immigration reform as a way to punt more of their highly skilled American engineers, programmers, and scientists out the door, replacing them with cheaper foreigners they want to import from India and other low-pay lands. These narcissistic billionaires are spending millions on campaign donations, lobbyists, and front groups to loosen immigration laws so they can wave in more than 110,000 foreign techers each year through a channel called the H-1B visa. It's no surprise that Schumer, a weak-kneed Democrat nicknamed Corporate Chuck, caved in to the tycoons. Not only does the bill nearly double the number of H-1B workers coming to displace Americans, but Schumer meekly accepted Hatch's amendments to let tech bosses give jobs to foreigners without first offering them to our homegrown professionals. Under another Hatch-Hatchet job, high-tech giants will even be able to fire Americans in order to bring in H-1B employees. This is Jim Hightower saying, to help fight this, go to www.aflcio.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Professor Mark Blyth is a professor at Brown University and author of a book attacking economic austerity. He's not so sure that Dodd-Frank will help clean up Wall Street because it's a bill too big to read and because the banking industry is at work making the gun lobby look like amateurs. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Mark Blyth is a professor of international political economy at Brown University and a faculty fellow at Brown's Watson Institute for International Studies. He received his Ph.D. in political science from Columbia University and taught at the Johns Hopkins University. He is also the author of a new book called Austerity, The History of a Dangerous Idea. Mark Blyth, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
That's good to be here.
So Why didn't the best minds on Wall Street and in the European capitals see the financial crisis coming?
There's a good one. Why didn't they see it coming? You know, the Queen Elizabeth asked the same thing of a whole bunch of economists back in 2008 at the London School of Economics, and they kind of looked at her and they were really embarrassed because they couldn't give her a good answer. I think the answer is twofold. The first one is to do with the intellectual climate. For the past 30 years, we've been denigrating the government and celebrating the market. And part of the celebration of the market is the notion that the market is always efficient. The price is always right. What you see is what you get. Anything the government does causes distortions and gets in the way. And this has been hegemonic in economics and economic theory for the past 30 years. Well, if you paint the world that way, crises like this can't happen. Now, they do happen, but they happened all around the world to other people. They happened to Mexicans. They happened to Argentines. They didn't happen to us. So it was always to do with them. We had crony capitalism because they were Asians. We had the tequila crisis, all those Mexicans. But it didn't happen to nice, sensible people in rich countries like us. Well, it does. Why? Because markets are inherently unstable. And we learned that back in the 20s and 30s, and we forgot that lesson. And when you train a generation of economists and financial engineers to think that the world is always perfectly calibrating, they're in for a hell of a shock because it's not.
Let's break it down a little bit. Two countries in Europe, Iceland and Ireland, went in entirely different directions in responding to the banking crisis. How did it work out for each country?
All right, quick bit of background on both. Both of them had enormous bubbles in terms of housing in Ireland and in terms of basically just bloated balance sheets on three banks in Iceland. In Iceland, they ended up at one point nearly 1,000% of GDP with the assets of the bank. So the banks were 10 times the size of the economy that was meant to support it. So eventually the whole thing goes bang in both cases. What happens? Ireland has got lots and lots of housing debt in three big banks, particularly one bank, and they decided to bail their banks. They built a thing called NAMA, which is a sort of a bad bank for toxic assets. They paid over the odds for the toxic assets. They put them there in the toxic asset bank, and they basically borrowed as much euros as they could from the European Central Bank under condition of austerity, and now they're trying to work themselves out of that. Unemployment in Ireland is about 15%. Migration is up. The Celtic tiger is wounded, if not dead, and they're in for a generation of misery having done so. Iceland, on the other hand, borrowed in a foreign currency and didn't have enough money to bail even one of its banks, so big were its debts. The IMF adopted heretical policies and even allowed capital controls to stem the flow of whatever was left in the economy. The whole economy blew up and they didn't bail their banks. Here's the surprise. Iceland's unemployment rate is now about the same as, if not lower, than the United States. They're growing again. Their income distribution's gotten much better. All the people who used to work in the banks engineering derivatives are now making real things in the economy. It's amazing what happens when you don't bail your banks. There's a message here for Democrats. The Tea Party had a point. We shouldn't have bailed them.
Is this a lesson that we can still take something from here in the United States?
Absolutely. We have got to get over this notion that there are things that are too big to fail. Because when you're saying something's too big to fail, you're basically saying you have a license for bad behavior. You can go out and engineer another asset bubble. You can take as much risk on your book as you want, regardless of the consequences, because the taxpayer's always there as your insurance policy. I am fed up being the taxpayer for Citibank and the rest of these guys. This has to end.
We're speaking with Mark Blyth, professor of international political economy at Brown University, author of a new book called Austerity, The History of a Dangerous Idea. Can the European debt crisis be blamed on the very existence of the European Union? In other words, could the different economies ever have worked in concert?
They could, in principle, but you have to think about the crisis differently. This is the most interesting part of writing the book, was trying to figure out what was really going on in Europe, because it's not immediately apparent why a bunch of stinky mortgages that blow up the so-called repo markets in America and then that spills out into the financial sector here end up causing a sovereign debt crisis in Europe. And what actually happened was the European banking system is twice the size and 3 times as levered up as the American banking system. So when the crisis hit, these guys suddenly found themselves with huge amount of dead assets on their books, similar to our too-big-to-fail institutions. The only thing is the architecture of the European Union meant that everyone had given away their own currencies, so they didn't have a printing press. That meant they couldn't print their way out of trouble, they couldn't inflate, they couldn't devalue their currency to basically give them some room because they didn't have one anymore, which left 2 choices. You either default and blow up your banking system, which takes the whole European economy down, or alternatively you deflate, which is austerity. So all they've been doing is all they can do, given the architecture of the European Union, because the central bank there can't do what Ben Bernanke did here, reach in, grab all the toxic assets, essentially flush the banking system with more liquidity, allow them to delever, recapitalise, and they start lending again. Consequently, they've got the same bad loans and the same mega banks frozen in time, and all they can do is basically squeeze the real economy in order to adjust their way out of it through wages and price cuts. And it's not working. It's making it worse.
Is it time then to break up the European Union?
I don't know if it's time for any one person or one country to do it. The better question is perhaps, will time break up the European Union? And at least on the monetary level, I think that its days are numbered. And I've been saying this for a couple of years, so I've been wrong for a couple of years. But at the end of the day, they don't have a way out of this unless they develop much stronger institutions like a European Treasury, common European bonds, and above all, a proper bank resolution mechanism where you can get rid of these bad assets. They don't have any of this. So how they can keep going, keep staggering along the road, when you have 60% unemployment and under 25s in Spain, and an average unemployment rate in the European Union of 14%, and that average includes the Germans, the biggest economy, whose unemployment rate is about 5%. Take them out and it jumps up to about 15-20%.
Can Germany save the day? Or would Germany rather not save the day?
It's not that it wouldn't rather not save the day. The German problem is this. They're too small to be a superpower and too big to be a normal economy. And they're export-led. The way to think about Germany, they're more like Japan than they are like Britain or America. They rely on exports. Their source of demand for their economic growth relies on selling BMWs to Asia as much as it does on selling widgets to other parts of Europe. Consequently, they can continue to run a surplus when the rest of Europe is deflating. And in fact, their surplus is contingent upon somebody else running a deficit. But their solution is we should all save and we should all run surpluses. Well, how are you going to do that? If the Asians are running a surplus and Europe's running a surplus, is the overtaxed American consumer going to just consume everything in the world to balance things out? That's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, you changed your view on the TARP program, the bank bailout started under President Bush and continued by President Obama. Why did you change your mind?
If you go to a website of an organization called bettermarkets.org, they're a lobbying organization in D.C., they did a very, very detailed accounting as to how much the bailout really cost in terms of lost GDP, foregone employment, what happens to the GDP track of the country because of this whole lot. And the figure they come up with is $13 trillion. So just think, that's the same as the debt. The whole national debt that we're freaking out about is only $15 trillion. So we spent $700 million on bailing them out, but the true cost of it could be $13 trillion. All right, at which point do we say that's worth saving Citibank, or that's worth saving J.P. Morgan? There are examples that are out there, such as Iceland, as we spoke about earlier. It's a very small country, I understand that. But if you're literally saying to large financial institutions, just get bigger, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the taxpayer's always going to come to the rescue. I don't see how you can have a functioning economy that way. The job of banks is to lend and make prudential loans and to take risk onto their books in a way that benefits society, not to basically be a casino with a free option on the public.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you make of a recent partnership in the U.S. Senate between extreme right-winger David Vitter and progressive Sherrod Brown to break up the banks?
I'm all in favor of it. The tragedy of American politics just now is that both sides, and I think this is true of the Democrats as well, but it's certainly more true of the Republicans, have become so entrenched in their positions that it's only when you end up doing highly technical things that are kind of below the radar, which is what Vitter and Brown are doing, that you can get away with any type of bipartisanship. Because if you talk to the other side, you must be suspect. We really have to get beyond this, because take too big to fail. This is a classic bipartisan issue. It doesn't matter if you're a businessman who's earning $10 million a year in the real economy, or you're a worker in a plant that's actually owned by a foreign company, you're union or you're non-union. At the end of the day, if financial risk is being generated on a colossal scale by a Wall Street that isn't actually benefiting society, why are we putting up with it?
Now, before we let you go, are you optimistic or pessimistic about any structural reforms taking place to prevent another crisis?
I'm actually more optimistic than you would think, having just had this conversation. Here's why: the way that I think about Dodd-Frank is the best way to think about it is too big to read. Right now, why do you have such an enormous bill? 1,400, and then it's 2,000 pages, whatever it is these days. Well, if you basically try and take on J.P. Morgan and these guys with a simple rule that would solve the problem, a leverage rule, right? You're just not allowed to lever up beyond a certain point. You can only get so big. If you feel you're not systemically risky, they will lobby against that. They will basically pull every trick in the book. They will spend billions of dollars. They will basically make the gun lobby look like amateurs. So you can't do that. So what do? It's death by 1,000 cuts. You attack them on every side possible, and that's why Dodd-Frank is so damn complex. So they're hiring legions of lawyers to figure their way out of it, but when they do that, there's more snares and more entanglement. And essentially what's happening is very slowly, these large banks are dying because the business model that they work on is old and it's had its day. They spent 25 years humping every equity market on the planet. We need equities. We need the issuing of shares, the underwriting of firms, but not as a bubble factory. Real estate's not coming back the way it was for any time soon. And the last item that you can basically play this game with, commodities, are too politically sensitive and the markets are too small. So the huge bubble factory that they've created for themselves, basically with a free option on the public as insurance, I think that's going away. Dodd-Frank is part of that. It's forcing a delevering by raising their costs. And over time, I don't know if we're making the system safer, but we're making it smaller, and smaller should be safer. Is it ideal? Is it what we should be doing? Is it optimal regulation? Not even close. But it's better than nothing.
Well, at least smaller's a shorter fall than larger, right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah. All right. Mark Blyth, professor of international political economy at Brown University, author of a new book called Austerity, The History of a Dangerous Idea. Mark, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Always a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, House Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer, who says sequester starts with S, which stands for stupid.
Doing some research for a column the other day about the workload of the United States Congress, and you hear this phrase, do nothing Congress. Well, the 112th Congress, the last 2 years under John Boehner, the least productive, least effective Congress probably ever, and it looks like this 113th may be on its way to bypassing it. If you want to find out when a Congress actually got things done, you go back to the first 2 years of the Obama administration with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker and Steny Hoyer as Majority Leader, cracking the whip and getting people to put them to work. That's when we really saw things happen. The Honorable Steny Hoyer joins us on our news line this morning. Those were the days, right, Congressman?
Those were the days, Bill. You're right, where we did things and substantively, and we got America moving again, not as fast as we want, because for the last 2 years, as you pointed out, we haven't done much. And we haven't done much the first 6 months or 5 months of this year either, unfortunately.
Well, the big question is, Congressman, we want to know if we're getting our tax dollars worth. Have you repealed Obamacare again this week?
Not this week, but the House passed it this week, of course, or last week, for the 37th time. Just to reiterate that I know it comes as a shocker that there are some Republicans against giving health care to an additional 30-plus million people in America. And they needed to reiterate that one more time. But it's the kind of thing that we are wasting time with, and we've spent 2.5 years posturing about repeal of Obamacare without trying to make sure that Obamacare works for all Americans, and that's a shame.
Yeah, and also without the Republicans coming up with any alternative, right? It's just...
They have no alternative. They didn't offer any alternative this past week, nor do they have any alternatives. They don't talk about alternatives. It's simply let the American public fend on its own for its health care, and that's not the kind of policy I think that's good for our country, good for our growth, good for the health of our people.
Mr. Whip, it's been maybe almost a couple of months now since the Senate passed a budget with a pretty healthy bipartisan majority over there. When are we going to see a conference committee between the House and the Senate on the budget, or will we?
Bill, I don't know that we'll ever see a conference, and the reason for that is, notwithstanding the fact that the Republicans have been talking about regular order for years and years and years, notwithstanding the fact that they demanded that the Senate pass a budget, which, of course, the Senate has done, and that they said that they needed to get a budget so we could get to a budget deal.
Yeah.
They have refused, both in the Senate and in the House, to go to conference. And it's interesting that so many United States senators have been critical of the Republican refusal. These are Republican senators. Senator John McCain said, "I'm very much in favor of it. That is going to conference. And I think we ought to do it right away. And blocking conference is incomprehensible and insane." Now, I could, Senator Isaacson, Senator Corker, Senator Coburn, Senator Enzi, Jeff Flake, who was here, John Boozman, Rob Portman, have all said that they believe not going to conference is inconsistent with the Republican demand for the passage of a budget. And I think that the reason they don't want to go to conference, matter of fact, I'm convinced of it, is they do not want to debate the substance of their proposal and the draconian cuts that their budget would require. And I think Paul Ryan, the chairman of the Budget Committee, knows that any agreement that he could reach in conference, which is compromise, coming together, give and take on both sides, if he brought it back to his House of Representatives, his members would reject it.
But and that the essence of the conference committee is to work out some middle ground, right?
It's essentially the essence of democracy. It's the essence of what the Founding Fathers created. Two houses, representatives from all over the country coming together, but understanding in the final analysis, if you want to see positive action, you're going to get that through agreement and compromise and coming together.
Congressman Steny Hoyer, our guest here on the Full Court Press this Thursday morning. You can follow all of his good work and the actions of the Democrats in the House through under his leadership at Whip Hoyer on Twitter, at Whip Hoyer. Congressman, we've been friends for a long time, and I'm always proud of your work. Don't think I was ever prouder of you than when you voted against this deal on the sequester. Now, you voted against this deal, which would have which carved out a great big exception for the FAA. That's not the way to go with the sequester, is it?
No. The sequester is, the line I use, Bill, is sequester is a word that starts with S, which stands for stupid. It is a mindless, common sense defying policy which says you cut the highest priority expenditures and the lowest priority expenditures the same amount. No family would do that. No American business would do that and stay in business. What I argued for is, yes, we needed to fix the particular item that was under consideration dealing with the FAA, but we needed to fix all of it. Chris Van Hollen, who I understand you had on a little earlier,
right,
has offered 4 times an amendment which got the same savings, same deficit reduction, but did so in a way that every bipartisan group has recommended through a combination of cuts and additional revenues, getting to the same deficit reduction. But the Republicans have refused, not only voted against it, they didn't vote against it. They didn't allow us to vote for it. They refused to allow that to even be considered on the floor of the House. They are committed and wedded to this sequester, which, as I said, is irrational, and it is cutting highest priority and lowest priorities. 70,000 eligible children are going to be kicked off Head Start. 10,000 teachers' jobs are at risk. 4 million fewer Meals on Wheels for seniors. 125,000 less rental vouchers for people who need housing, and 2,100 fewer food inspectors to make sure that our food is safe and healthy. That's the kind of mindless attention that has not been given, I should say, by our Republican friends. And they not only that, but they refuse to allow any alternatives to be considered on the floor of the House of Representatives.
And aren't we leading up to another fiscal crisis, I guess, or fiscal cliff, maybe, with the debt ceiling?
You know, the Republicans have taken a very ironic position, I think. On the one hand, Speaker Boehner, Majority Leader Cantor have said that defaulting on our debt is an unacceptable alternative. But then on the other hand, they say they're going to hold hostage the creditworthiness of the United States of America if we don't do what they want to do. In other words, their way or putting America into a place where it's not paying its bills. Americans don't believe that's their country. The wealthiest country on the face of the earth pays its bills, maintains its creditworthiness. But the Republicans took us to the brink of default in August of 2011. And as a result, for the first time in history, we were downgraded. Just downgraded by one rating company, just 1 point. But rating agencies have now said if we continue along the path that the Republicans are pursuing, that we are at risk of being downgraded again. And what that will mean, of course, is it will slow the economy, undermine the creation of jobs, and ultimately cost every American more in interest rates and loss of value of retirement funds. So this is a reckless policy that the Republicans have been pursuing. We have urged them take the debt limit off the political screen. Don't demagogue about the debt limit. Let's deal with that. And then, yes, let's deal in a conference in the budget with an agreement that gets us to the deficit reduction that we need to pursue while maintaining investments in growing our economy.
Yeah, and this is strange. This coming from the party that used to call itself, or people used to consider at least, the party of fiscal responsibility, right?
Yeah, Bill, that's why.
Remember those days.
Yeah, it's so ironic that you have almost every Republican leader say, look, it would be irresponsible for us to default on our debt, and turning around in the next breath and saying, but if you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to take us there.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes no sense.
No. Finally, I gotta say, Congressman, the state of Maryland has really had the last year or so has been remarkable progress on a lot of progressive issues. I mean, it's just getting rid of the death penalty, recognizing same-sex marriage, reducing the penalties on the use of marijuana. I mean, there's so many across the board. I mean, Maryland's really showing the way here in many ways.
That's Bill, one of the things as well, not only did the legislature and Governor O'Malley initiate those and see them passage through the General Assembly, but, on the Dream Act that
right.
we passed, and on marriage equality, the voters voted on this. People who are opposed to those took them to referendum. We had a referendum in the last election, and the Maryland electorate confirmed both of those actions, saying, yes, these are fair. These are this is what America's about, equality of treatment to all people, about inclusion. And I was very proud of the Maryland public, not only of Governor O'Malley and Senator Miller and Mike Bush, the President and Speaker of the House, and the members, but also of the American people. I mean, the Maryland public, American people as well. But which I think, frankly, in terms of issues regarding equality for LGBT community, lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender, the American people have moved faster on this civil rights issue than any civil rights issue I've seen in my lifetime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you've been working that vineyard a long time, Congressman. I think this reflects a lot of your leadership, and your good work is paying off in the state of Maryland.
Well, thanks, Bill.
We appreciate your leadership and your time this morning, Congressman.
Thanks for your efforts. Always good to be with you. Bye-bye.
All right, great. Steny Hoyer.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Andrew Bacevich, Mark Blyth, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the show and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.com